The roar of the engine sliced through the crisp night air as Evan gunned the throttle, his sleek motorcycle racing down the deserted suburban streets. In his rearview mirror, he spotted the flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser, the siren's wail piercing the silence. Asterisk, damn it. Not again. Asterisk, he thought, gripping the handlebars tighter. Evan had tangled with the Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association too many times, and their influence with the local police force was no secret. This time, he feared, they might finally succeed in shutting him down for good. As the police car drew closer, Evan pushed his bike to its limits, weaving through the narrow streets with practiced precision. Just as he rounded a sharp corner, a figure stepped out from the shadows, and Evan's eyes widened in recognition. "Karen," he growled, his voice laced with both dread and defiance. The HOA president stood there, arms crossed, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Well, well, if it isn't our resident troublemaker," Karen said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I told you your motorcycle was too loud, Evan. Now you're going to pay the price." Evan's heart raced as he realized he was trapped, the police car closing in behind him. But then, a sudden movement caught his eye, and his jaw dropped in disbelief. Asterisk, no way, asterisk, he thought, as Karen's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to sheer panic. Her sleek Mercedes, parked just a few feet away, was slowly rolling forward, inching its way toward a steep embankment. "My car," Karen shrieked, her composure crumbling as she dashed toward the runaway vehicle. Evan watched in stunned silence as the luxury sedan teetered on the edge, its tires spinning helplessly in the air. In that moment, Evan knew he had a choice to make. He could seize the opportunity to escape the police and disappear into the night, or he could risk everything to help the woman who had been his relentless adversary. Gritting his teeth, Evan gunned the engine and maneuvered his bike alongside the dangling Mercedes, reaching out a steady hand. Karen's eyes widened as she realized what he was doing, and she hesitated for a split second before grasping his outstretched arm. With a tremendous effort, Evan pulled Karen onto the back of his motorcycle, the police car now mere seconds away. As they sped off into the darkness, Evan could feel Karen's arms wrapped tightly around his waist, her breath hot on the back of his neck. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a strange mixture of fear and confusion. Evan didn't answer. Instead, he focused on navigating the winding streets, his mind racing with the implications of his decision. Had he just made a deal with the devil, or was this the beginning of an unexpected truce? One thing was certain. The power struggle between Evan and the Oakwood Hills HOA had just taken an irrevocable turn. With the police car now trailing them, Evan pushed his motorcycle to its limits, weaving through the narrow streets with a precision born of years of experience. Karen clung to him, her nails digging into his jacket as she struggled to maintain her balance. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. Evan gritted his teeth, his mind racing. He couldn't very well take her back to her car, not with the police hot on their heels, and he certainly couldn't lead them straight to his own home. Asterisk, think, Evan? Think, asterisk, he urged himself, scanning the dark neighborhood for a safe haven. Suddenly, an idea struck him, and he made a sharp turn, guiding the motorcycle down a winding side street. After a few tense minutes, Evan pulled up to a nondescript apartment building, its windows dark and its entrance hidden in the shadows. Cutting the engine, he helped Karen off the bike, her legs shaking slightly. "What is this place?" she asked, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "It's a safe house," Evan replied, ushering her toward the building's side entrance. "A friend's place. We can hide out here until the cops give up the chase." Karen hesitated, but the sound of the approaching police siren spurred her forward, and she followed Evan inside without further protest. Once they were safely ensconced in the dimly lit apartment, Evan turned to face his unexpected passenger, his expression guarded. "All right, Karen, what the hell is going on?" He demanded, "Why were the police after you?" Karen's eyes darted around the cramped space, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "One minute, I was on my way home, and the next, my car started rolling down the hill. I didn't know what to do." Even studied her for a long moment, sensing the vulnerability behind her usual facade of control and superiority. Something wasn't right, and he had a feeling that the Oakwood Hills HOA was at the heart of it. "Well, you're safe here for now," he said, gesturing toward a battered couch. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll see if I can figure out what's going on." As Evan moved to the small kitchenette, his mind raced with questions. What had Karen done to warrant the police's attention? And more importantly, what did this mean for the ongoing power struggle between him and the HOA? One thing was clear: the game had just changed, and Evan was no longer playing by their rules. Evan paced the cramped apartment, his mind whirling with possibilities as he tried to make sense of the situation. Why had the police been chasing Karen? And what did it have to do with the Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association? He glanced over at the woman sitting on the battered couch, her usually impeccable appearance disheveled and her eyes downcast. For once, Karen seemed small and vulnerable, a far cry from the domineering, manipulative figure he had come to know. Clearing his throat, Evan moved closer, settling into a worn armchair across from her. "All right, Karen, I think it's time you start talking. What the hell is going on?" Karen's gaze lifted, and Evan was struck by the raw fear in her expression. I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "One minute, I was driving home, and the next, my car just started rolling down the hill. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't." She trailed off, her hands trembling slightly. Evan leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Did you see anything or anyone suspicious before it happened?" Karen shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "No, nothing. It all happened so fast. One minute, I was fine, and the next, the police were chasing me." Evan drummed his fingers on the arm of the chair, his mind racing. It was no secret that the Oakwood Hills HOA had a tight grip on the local authorities, so the fact that the police were after Karen raised some serious red flags. "You know, this isn't the first time the HOA has been involved in some shady business," he mused, his gaze steady on Karen's face. "Maybe they're trying to get rid of you too." Karen's eyes widened, and she sat up straighter, a spark of defiance flaring in her expression. "Get rid of me? But I'm the president of the HOA. Why would they want to do that?" Evan shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know, but it seems like a pretty big coincidence that your car just happened to start rolling down a hill with the police right on your tail." Karen's brow furrowed, and Evan could practically see the wheels turning in her mind. "You think someone sabotaged my car?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mixture of disbelief and alarm. Evan nodded, his expression grim. "It's the only thing that makes sense. And if the HOA is behind it, then we're both in some serious trouble." The realization dawned on Karen's face, and Evan could see the fear and uncertainty taking hold. For once, the powerful HOA president seemed vulnerable and out of her depth. "What are we going to do?" she whispered, her gaze locked onto Evan's. Evan leaned forward, his eyes glinting with a determined resolve. "We're going to fight back. And we're going to take down the Oakwood Hills HOA once and for all." The tension in the small apartment was palpable as Evan and Karen stared at each other, the weight of their newfound alliance settling heavily between them. "Fight back," Karen echoed, her brow furrowed in a mix of apprehension and reluctant curiosity. "What exactly do you have in mind?" Evan leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming thoughtfully against the worn armrest. "Well, for starters, we need to figure out what the HOA is up to. If they're willing to sabotage your car to get rid of you, then they're clearly playing for keeps." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing as she considered his words. But how do we even begin to take on the Oakwood Hills HOA? They have the entire town in their pocket. The police, the city council, even the local media. It's like they're an untouchable fortress. Evan couldn't help but chuckle, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. That's exactly why we have to be smarter, Karen. We can't just charge in headfirst and expect to win. We need to play the long game, gather intelligence, and find their weaknesses. Karen's gaze searched his face, a reluctant admiration flickering in her eyes. And you think you know how to do that? I've been fighting the HOA for years, Evan replied, his expression hardening. I know their tactics, their pressure points, and their dirty little secrets. All we have to do is dig deep enough to find the skeletons in their closet. Karen's brow furrowed as she considered his words, her fingers drumming against her thigh in a nervous rhythm. All right, I'm listening. What's your plan? Evan leaned forward, his gaze intense. First, we need to find out what exactly triggered the police to come after you. Was it just the car incident, or is there something more going on? Karen shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. I have no idea. As I said, 1 minute I was driving home, and the next, my car was rolling down the hill. It all happened so fast, I didn't have time to process what was happening. Evan nodded, his mind already whirring with possibilities. Okay, then we start there. We need to retrace your steps, see if we can find any clues or witnesses that might shed some light on what really happened. Karen's eyes widened, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. You mean, we're actually going to investigate this? Shouldn't we just lay low and wait for the police to call off the search? Evan shook his head, his expression grim. No, Karen, that's exactly what the HOA will expect us to do. They're probably hoping we'll just disappear, so they can cover their tracks and continue their nefarious plans. He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. But we're not going to let that happen. We're going to fight back, and we're going to do it on our own terms. Karen's shoulders tensed, and for a moment, Evan could see the familiar glint of determination in her eyes. All right, Evan, I'm in. What do we do next? Evan's lips curled into a faint smile, a spark of triumph igniting in his chest. We start by going back to the scene of the crime. Tomorrow, we're going to retrace your steps and see what we can uncover. The next morning, Evan and Karen stood at the base of the steep embankment where Karen's Mercedes had come dangerously close to going over the edge. The scene was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic on the main road. Evan scanned the area, his keen eyes searching for any clues that might shed light on what had transpired the previous night. Karen stood beside him, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her expression a mixture of apprehension and determination. All right, let's start from the beginning, Evan said, his gaze shifting to Karen. Where exactly were you coming from when this happened? Karen's brow furrowed as she retraced her steps. I was on my way home from a meeting at the HOA office. I'd been there late, working on some new initiatives for the neighborhood. Evan nodded, his mind already piecing together a possible scenario. And did you notice anything out of the ordinary on your drive? Any cars following you or anyone acting suspiciously? Karen shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. No, nothing. It was a quiet night, just like any other. I was just focused on getting home. Evan's gaze shifted to the street, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. Okay, then let's see if we can find any security cameras or witnesses that might have seen something. The two of them set off, combing the neighborhood for any potential clues. They spoke to nearby residents, but the responses were largely the same. No one had seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. As the afternoon wore on, Evan's frustration began to mount. This is getting us nowhere, he muttered, running a hand through his hair in exasperation. There has to be something we're missing. Karen, who had been silent for the better part of the afternoon, suddenly spoke up. Wait, there is one thing I haven't told you. Evan turned to her, his brow raised in expectation. "What is it?" Karen hesitated, her gaze darting around nervously. "Well, I was on the phone with someone just before it happened." Evan's eyes narrowed, his interest piqued. "Who were you talking to?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, and Evan could see the conflict warring in her expression. It was one of the HOA board members. We were discussing some sensitive matters." Evan's heart rate quickened, the pieces slowly falling into place. "What kind of sensitive matters?" Karen's gaze dropped to the ground, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. I can't really say. It's confidential HOA business." Evan stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "Karen, if the HOA is behind this, then we need to know everything. No more secrets, okay?" Karen hesitated for a moment, then sighed heavily. "All right, fine. We were discussing a proposal to raise the HOA fees significantly, despite the fact that most of the homeowners are already struggling to make ends meet." Evan's eyes widened, and he felt a surge of anger course through him. "So you were going to screw over the residents to line your own pockets?" Karen's gaze snapped up, her expression defensive. "It's not that simple. The HOA has a lot of expenses, and we need to maintain the neighborhood's upkeep. But I had my doubts about the proposal." Evan studied her for a long moment, his mind racing. "And someone on the board didn't like that, did they?" Karen's shoulders sagged, and she nodded reluctantly. "Yes, I think so. One of the board members was particularly adamant about the fee increase, and when I expressed my concerns, they got angry." Evan's lips curved into a grim smile. Well, looks like we found our first suspect. Now we just need to figure out who that board member was, and how far they're willing to go to keep the HOA's dirty little secrets under wraps." He turned to Karen, his expression serious. "This is going to get ugly, Karen. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Karen's eyes hardened with determination. "I'm in, Evan. Whatever it takes to take down the HOA and expose their corruption. I'm done playing by their rules." Evan nodded, a glimmer of respect in his gaze. "All right. Then let's get to work." The air was thick with tension as Evan and Karen pored over the files and documents they had gathered from Karen's time as the HOA president. The deeper they dug, the more they uncovered. A web of financial mismanagement, conflicts of interest, and questionable decision-making that stretched back for years. "This is worse than I thought," Evan murmured, his brow furrowed as he scanned through the latest batch of documents. The HOA has been siphoning funds for their own personal projects and pet initiatives, while neglecting the actual needs of the neighborhood. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her expression grim. "I knew they were playing fast and loose with the budget, but I had no idea it was this bad. No wonder they were so eager to push through that fee increase. They're practically bleeding the residents dry." Evan nodded, his gaze shifting to the board member list they had compiled. "And it looks like our prime suspect is none other than Robert Sinclair, the HOA's treasurer and one of the most vocal advocates for the fee hike." Karen's eyes narrowed, a spark of recognition flashing across her features. "Sinclair? He's always been a thorn in my side, pushing for more restrictive rules and higher assessments. I should have known he was behind this." Evan leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the table. "All right, so we've got our guy. Now the question is, how do we take him down without getting caught in the crossfire?" Karen's brow furrowed as she considered the options. "Well, we know he's been diverting funds for his own personal projects, right? Maybe we can find a way to expose that. Hit him where it really hurts." Evan nodded, a glint of determination in his eyes. "I like the way you think, Karen, and I think I know just the way to do it." Over the next few days, Evan and Karen worked tirelessly, piecing together a comprehensive case against Robert Sinclair and the HOA's corrupt practices. They combed through financial records, interviewed neighbors, and even managed to uncover a few damning pieces of evidence that seemed to point directly to Sinclair's involvement in the sabotage of Karen's car. As the pieces fell into place, Evan and Karen knew they were on the verge of something big, a chance to take down the HOA and expose their corruption for all the world to see. But just as they were about to put their plan into action, a new threat emerged, one that would test the limits of their alliance and their resolve. "Even, we have a problem," Karen said, her voice tinged with a rare note of panic. "It's Sinclair. He's calling an emergency HOA meeting, and he's going to try to have me removed as president." Evan's eyes widened, and he felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Damn it, he must have caught wind of what we're up to. We need to act fast, Karen." Karen's gaze was steady, her expression hardening with determination. "I'm ready. Evan, let's take this bastard down." Evan nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "All right, then let's do this. It's time to show the Oakwood Hills HOA that they've finally met their match." The tension in the packed HOA meeting room was palpable as Evan and Karen took their seats, their eyes locked on the imposing figure of Robert Sinclair at the front of the room. Sinclair's gaze swept across the gathered homeowners, his lips curled into a self-satisfied smirk. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you know, we have a serious issue that needs to be addressed." He turned his attention to Karen, his eyes narrowing. "It's come to my attention that our dear president has been engaging in some questionable activities that put the interests of this community at risk. Therefore, I motion to have her removed from office, effective immediately." A murmur of shock and confusion rippled through the crowd, and Karen rose to her feet, her chin held high. "And what exactly are these questionable activities you speak of, Mr. Sinclair?" she asked, her voice sharp and unwavering. Sinclair's lips curled into a sneer. "Well, for starters, there's the matter of your reckless driving and your blatant disregard for the HOA's rules and regulations. Not to mention the fact that you've been colluding with known troublemakers like Evan to undermine the very foundation of this community." Evan tensed in his seat, his hands clenching into fists. But before he could speak up, Karen cut him off, her tone dripping with disdain. "That's a rather serious accusation, Sinclair. Perhaps you'd care to provide some actual evidence to back up these wild claims." Sinclair's expression darkened, and he slammed his fist on the podium, causing several homeowners to jump in their seats. "Evidence? I'll give you evidence, you meddlesome woman. The fact that your car was found dangling over a cliff, mere seconds away from a catastrophic accident, is more than enough to call your leadership into question." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, and Karen's eyes narrowed, her gaze unwavering. "Are you suggesting that I intentionally sabotaged my own vehicle?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. Sinclair's lips curled into a triumphant smile. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Karen. And I have the full support of the HOA board to have you removed from office and charged with reckless endangerment." Evan could feel the tension in the room reaching a fever pitch, and he knew they were running out of time. Exchanging a quick glance with Karen, he rose to his feet, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Hold on a minute, Sinclair. That's a pretty bold accusation, and I don't think you have the evidence to back it up." Sinclair's gaze snapped to Evan, his expression darkening. "And what would you know about it? You're just a troublemaker who's been trying to undermine the HOA from the start." Evan held up a hand, his expression calm and measured. "Actually, Sinclair, I think I know a thing or two about this little incident. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that you're the one who's been sabotaging people's cars to keep them in line." The room fell silent, and Sinclair's face flushed with anger. "How dare you make such an accusation? I am a respected member of this community, and I won't stand for this kind of slander." Evan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Really? Then why don't you tell us all about the little side project you've been funding with HOA funds? The one where you've been diverting money to your own personal accounts." The color drained from Sinclair's face, and he stammered, unable to find the words to refute Evan's claims. "That's what I thought," Evan said, his voice dripping with triumph. "You've been lining your own pockets at the expense of the very people you're supposed to be serving. And now, you're trying to cover your tracks by getting rid of Karen, the one person who's been brave enough to stand up to your corruption." The room erupted in a cacophony of outrage as the homeowners realized the full extent of Sinclair's betrayal. Evan watched with satisfaction as the once powerful HOA president cowered in the face of the angry mob. "This meeting is adjourned," Karen said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "And Robert Sinclair, you are hereby relieved of your duties as treasurer, effective immediately." As the homeowners surged forward, Evan caught Karen's eye, a shared sense of triumph passing between them. They had won this round, but the war against the Oakwood Hills HOA was far from over. The aftermath of the dramatic HOA meeting was nothing short of chaos. Sinclair, the former treasurer, had been escorted out of the building by a group of angry homeowners, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. Evan stood beside Karen, watching as the crowd dispersed, their voices still buzzing with a mixture of outrage and relief. "Well, that certainly went better than I expected," Evan remarked, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Karen nodded, her expression pensive. "Yes, but I have a feeling this is only the beginning. Sinclair and the rest of the HOA board aren't going to take this lying down." Evan's gaze darkened. "I know. They'll be coming after us with everything they've got. We need to be ready." The two of them walked in silence for a moment, the weight of their newfound alliance heavy in the air. "Why did you help me, Evan?" Karen asked suddenly, her voice soft and vulnerable. "After all the trouble I've caused you, why would you risk everything to take down the HOA?" Evan paused, considering his words carefully. "Because, Karen, I've been fighting this battle for a long time. And I've come to realize that the only way to truly win is to work together, to put aside our differences and focus on the bigger picture." He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "You may be the HOA president, but you're also a homeowner, just like the rest of us. And when it comes down to it, we're all in this together." Karen's eyes widened, and Evan could see the conflict raging within her. "But what about all the times I've tried to shut you down? All the rules and regulations I've enforced?" Evan shrugged, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe we can find a way to compromise. I'm not saying we have to be best friends, but if we can put our differences aside and focus on taking down the real enemy, then I think we might just have a chance." Karen stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. "All right, Evan, I'm in. Let's take down the Oakwood Hills HOA once and for all." Evan grinned, a spark of triumph flaring in his chest. "That's what I like to hear. This is going to be one hell of a fight, but I think we're up for the challenge." As they walked away, Evan couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. The power struggle between him and the HOA was far from over. But for the first time, he felt like he had a true ally in the fight. And with Karen by his side, he knew that anything was possible.